one of IRF 2015, we're going to set the tone with a special curtain raiser conducted by Abhik Singhi, who's Senior Partner and Director, Asia Pacific Leader. He's part of the Consumer and Retail Practice End at the Boston Consulting Group, or BCG. Abhik will share some startling facts and data on Indian retailing. He's going to explain why a recalibration, a remodeling really of Indian retail is almost unavoidable in the near future. So the important question to ask is, what's your strategy going to be? How are you going to preempt that? How are you going to prepare for that? May I invite on stage Abhik Singhi, please.
So many times one comes to these conferences, and especially the first session is the one where everybody is just getting into the room. And how does one create interest in the first session of the day? The first session of the day is the second most difficult session of a conference like this. The most difficult one is obviously the one just after lunch, right? So what I'm going to talk about today is what holds true for Indian retail going forward. I have done similar presentations, but there are two things which are different about the presentation I'm doing today. Number one is the way I'm dressed. So I've never come to any of these presentations not wearing a jacket, a blazer, something. And I've been inspired by, among others, Nagesh, who's sitting there and smiling, who gave me this tip that when you come to these conferences, you should be at your fashionable best, number one. Number two, you should be talking about what you are convinced about, but you should also dress the way you are talking about. So what I'm going to be talking today is about, can India be the hub for the next wave of retail innovation? So why am I talking about this? So the first slide is a slide which some of you may have seen at different points of time. So retail in the truest sense of the word is probably about 700 to 1,000 years old, because it is at that point of time that transactions started happening with the exchange of money. Before that, it was much more in terms of barter, but you actually had that. Over the last 150, 200 years, you find that most of the retail innovations have happened in the West. So you have what happened in the UK, and that's why probably UK was called the nation of shopkeepers. So many of the interesting concepts, many of which are being used today in the world, originated 100, 120, 75, 50 years back. Many times when we have the discussion in terms of what's going to happen in India, we look at what happened in the US 30, 40 years back. We look at what happened in China 10, 15 years back. And we look at what happened in country X, Y years back to predict what is going to happen in India today, tomorrow. I'm actually going to start with a proposition that given the way things are changing now, the speed of change has become so rapid that it is actually no longer useful or possible to wait for things which happened 15 years back in some of these other countries to have them happen here. And therefore, what I'm going to be talking about is a set of 4 trends, both demand side and supply side, which are impacting global retail today. And more importantly, you actually see evidence of each one of these trends happening in India today. The approach which was used in the past to say this is what happened in the US 25 years back or 30 years back, or this happened in China 10 years back, made complete sense to look at it from an India perspective, because on many of those dimensions we were lagging, either whether it was in terms of technology, whether it in terms of access, there was a lag which is there. But as you will see for each of these trends, the gap, which is what is happening in the US or the West, what is happening in the East, what is happening in India, the gap is narrowing, and India comes with its unique set of constraints and challenges, which leads us to at least spend time on the question as to whether the next wave of innovation in retail will happen from India. Let me get straight to each of these that I'm talking about. The first is what you see as the combination of what I call mobile, social, and human contact. I don't know whether to call it multi-channel. I don't know whether to call it omni-channel. It is actually, all three of them are happening together. They are happening at the same space, and it is happening in a way that the boundaries between one and the other are narrowing disproportionately. You see something on your PC and you like it, it registers in your mind. A few hours later or a few days later, it comes into your mind again. While somebody had posted something similar on Facebook, you actually go and look at that, and then maybe the transaction actually happens at the store, maybe not at the store. The thing which is different from any time in the past is all of these things are happening together. This obviously originated somewhere in the West, but let's see what some of the facts or numbers are talking about in India. Every year, BCG does a survey of close to 20,000 consumers trying to find out what the digital rate of adoption is. Sometimes it gets very embarrassing because you find that the numbers that were true 6 months back no longer hold true. So one of the things that we've decided to do is this survey we'll not actually do annually, we'll have to do every 6 months. And you see some of the numbers which points to the fact that if you are witnessing growth rates of 200% over a one-year phenomena, then you have to do it more periodically. Otherwise, what held true 1 year back is no longer holding true. The other thing, which is also important, is the fact that if you look at the speed of response by Indian players, it has been faster than what some of the responses have been in the West. This is an obvious one. So the extent of digital influence depends on the category. And you find this true in the case of India as well. There are some categories where I would argue retail in the conventional form is going to become a dying business. So if I look at the 5 things which are important for the Indian consumer, it is the A, B, C, D, E. It is availability, so I want it available. B, breadth of assortment. C, convenience, which actually means very different things for different consumers. D, deals and discounts. E, experience. If you look at each of these categories, the extent of importance of A, B, C, D, E is very different. For some categories, for example, consumer electronics, I would argue that having something which is a great digital platform will make the offline platform, unless there is a very differentiated experience, redundant. Phenomenon number 2. This is my favorite ad. And this is my favorite ad because whenever this ad plays, my wife actually gets into a happy mood because George Clooney is there, right? But more importantly, Nestle has really revolutionized what they did with Nespresso. There is the razor and blades model, which is the obvious one. But the more important thing to my mind is the fact about the disintermediation of the channel. We are actually not unused to this. How many people here have Eureka phobes in their house as the water purifier? How many people have got Eureka phobes? Did somebody come to your home and sell it and install it? Yes? No? Maybe? We have been used to the direct model. Amway is in the news for all set of reasons, but if you look at it, it is probably one of the fastest growing companies in India over a long time period. You find more and more brands because of either the lack of large enough retailers or because they wanted to protect the brand experience, have actually developed this on their own. And therefore, the disintermediation is something which has happened in the past. If you look at, again, what is happening from a CPG perspective, you see that again. Now, whether you use it as a store or not is a choice, but you see one and many more examples of Indian consumer product companies also doing the same, which is disintermediating the retailer. And I think for all the retailers in the house today, I think one of the things which is going to be important is, are there products, categories, or brands that I'm carrying which actually can disintermediate me? Because that probably is going to be a bigger threat than anything else which we are going to be talking about. This is a controversial one. Okay. The rule of forecasting is twofold. Number one, you make so many predictions that 10, 20% of them will hold true. And then you can say, 10 things I said and 2 of them came true. You don't need to talk about the other 8. The other rule is you project 30 years, 40 years from now. Who the hell knows what's going to happen in 2050, right? I'm going to stick my neck out, and I think there is a set of reasons why smaller store formats will do well. The factors that you see are not unique to India, but they are intensified in India. And therefore, if you think about any format that you're thinking about lifting, copying, taking influence from the West, can that be shrunk? Is probably going to provide you an answer with what its likelihood for success. It's happening across the world, but I think the greater inspiration could be had by what we actually encounter every single day, which is the small kirana store. I think on a set of dimensions, whether it is customer service, whether it is looking at replenishment, whether it's looking at inventory management, whether it's looking at how to manage shrinkage, probably this entity can provide some innovative learnings about what to be done or what not to be done from the context of retail innovation itself. The fourth and the last, the times that consumers or customers were people who bought something from you, and at the end of the day, you can forget about it, actually is no longer true. The single largest source of influence today across categories, across countries, is what somebody else said. It holds true for more than 100 odd categories. It holds true across all the 20 major economies of the world. The single biggest driver of purchase is what somebody else has said about it. It's not TV advertising, it's not print advertising, it is what somebody else has said. The new technology, the dialogue actually allows for this to happen, and consumers and customers are getting more in control. An easy way to address that is to set up a Facebook store. This is something which people have done, not only from the perspective of purchase, but also from the perspective of influence. It's probably the most double-edged sword that one can think of. If you get it right, there are huge, huge benefits. If you get it wrong, one dissatisfied consumer, a set of dissatisfied consumers can destroy your brand, your franchise, and therefore, being quick and adept in responding to this is going to be critical. Now, if you look at each of these 4 elements, we see evidence of this happening. Now, the question really is, can India do this? Why do we believe that India can do this? I looked across, not in retail, but across a set of other industry to say, is there evidence where people in the past, Indian companies in the past, have actually done this? I'm sure everybody in the room knows about the telecom example where India and Airtel were the first ones to adopt the model where you actually outsource many of the services and you change the fundamental economics of the model. The Arvind Eye Hospital, Jaipur foot in healthcare is well known. Innovative companies which have made it possible for people to access Facebook without active internet or without a feature phone, those are all elements that have been done. If you look at the common theme across each one of these, they did two things. Number one, they were aware of what's happening globally. They were operating under constraints which were more severe than any of their peers globally, whether it was in terms of cost of capital, whether it was in terms of purchasing power of the consumer, whether it was in terms of the infrastructure provided. So they were aware of what was happening. They were operating under deeper, more severe constraints. And number three, they tried off something, did not bet the bank on it, but they tried off something and then scaled it up. Unlike in many of the past presentations, and I assume that some of the discussions that we will have today, the intent of this presentation was actually not to provide you with what I think is the definitive answer. Because if I was to be candid, I don't think anybody in today's world can tell you what exactly is going to happen in 5 years or 7 years or 10 years from now. The intent of this presentation was to really act as the starter for this conversation. It was not meant to have the last word on this, but to start the dialogue. And I'm sure this dialogue is going to continue over the next 1.5 days and during the set of conversations which will happen even much after. Thank you very much.